This is my true story. I was 72 years old when I made a choice that shocked everyone. I married a woman who was only 26. People whispered behind my back saying she was too young, saying I was foolish, saying it would end in pain. But I told myself it was love, that she cared for me, that age did not matter. I wanted to believe in happiness again, but what I discovered broke me more than age ever could. She carried a secret that destroyed everything. Before I tell you what happened, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And please subscribe so my story can reach more people. At 72, I thought my days of love were behind me. My wife had passed away years earlier, and I had lived quietly, surrounded only by memories and silence. Then she came into my life, a young woman of 26. Her smile was bright, her voice soft, and she looked at me in a way that made me believe I was still worthy of love. My neighbors stared when they saw us together. Some whispered that she was only after my money. Others laughed behind my back, calling me a fool for falling for someone so young. But I shut my ears to their voices. I told myself she saw past the wrinkles on my face and the weakness in my step. I told myself she cared for the man inside, for my wisdom, my experience, and my heart. When we married, people were shocked. Friends looked at me with disbelief, family members avoided my eyes, and strangers shook their heads. But I stood tall, convincing myself that love does not care about numbers. I wanted to prove them wrong, to show them that even at 72, a man could find happiness again. On our wedding day, she wore a white dress that sparkled under the lights. She held my hand tightly, and when I looked at her, I forgot my age. I forgot my weakness. I felt alive again. The first weeks were like a dream. She called me sweet names, made me feel young again, and told me I was her world. I believed every word. For years I had lived in emptiness, and suddenly I was smiling again. I felt proud walking beside her, even as people whispered and stared. I ignored the whispers because in my heart I thought I had found love again. She moved into my home, and I welcomed her without hesitation. I wanted her to feel secure, to feel that she belonged. I gave her keys, access to everything, even my heart. I told myself this was trust, this was marriage, this was love. But beneath that trust, beneath my belief in her, seeds of control began to grow. Seeds I did not see at first. Still, in those early days, I was blind to doubt. When she held my arm in public, I felt young again. When she smiled at me, I thought the world was smiling too. My friends shook their heads. My neighbors whispered louder, but I silenced the noise. I told myself I had beaten loneliness, that I had proven love could still be mine. It was the unexpected marriage, the kind no one believed in. But I believed. And that belief would soon cost me more than I ever imagined. The change was slow at first, so gentle I almost did not notice it. In the early days of our marriage, she would smile and say she wanted the best for both of us. But soon, those words began to sound more like orders. She started asking about my finances, not with curiosity, but with expectation. "Show me your accounts," she said one evening. I hesitated, but she pressed harder, saying as my wife she had the right to know everything. Out of love, out of fear of losing her, I handed over the details. That was the first mistake. Once she saw what I had, her behavior shifted. She began talking about new clothes she wanted, handbags that cost more than my monthly pension, trips to places I had no strength to visit. She called them necessities, framing them as things any loving husband should provide. When I looked surprised at the cost, she frowned, her voice sharp. "It's your duty," she told me. "You promised to care for me. Isn't that what marriage means?" I gave in. I bought her the things she wanted. At first I told myself it was normal. Every husband wants to make his wife happy. But her demands grew larger, and her gratitude grew smaller. Soon she was swiping my card without asking. Packages arrived daily at the house, jewelry boxes, shoes, expensive perfumes. She filled closets with dresses I had never seen her wear. When I asked why she needed so much, she rolled her eyes and said, "You're too old to understand." She took over my wallet. She handled the bills, though I noticed they were suddenly higher. She told me she needed more money for emergencies, but the emergencies always looked like luxuries. I sat quietly, handing her cash, watching her walk away with everything I had earned in my lifetime. Sometimes she would look at me with pity, as if I were just an old man she had to manage. Other times she would look at me with impatience, as if I were slowing her life down. The respect I thought came with marriage was fading quickly, replaced by control. At family gatherings, she showed off the things I bought her, but never mentioned me. She acted as though she deserved it all, as though I was lucky to even stand beside her. I smiled weakly, ashamed, afraid to admit I was losing grip of my own life. The first signs of control were clear, but I ignored them. I told myself it was just her way, that love sometimes looked different with age, that maybe this was normal. Deep down, though, I knew the truth. She was not building a life with me. She was building a life from me. It began quietly, with small comments slipped into conversations. At first, I thought she was joking when she told people I was too slow or too old-fashioned. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. But soon, the jokes became sharper, louder, and public. At dinners with friends, she would interrupt me when I spoke, rolling her eyes and saying, "Don't mind him. He forgets things." His old laughter would follow, and my face would burn. I had once been a man respected for my words, but now I sat silent, humiliated by my own wife. At restaurants, she would snatch the menu from my hands, telling the waiter, "He can't read the small print." Her words cut deep. I could read perfectly fine. My eyes might not have been as sharp as before, but I was not helpless. Yet she made me appear weak, useless, and foolish in front of strangers. I looked down at my plate, hiding the shame that grew heavier every time she opened her mouth. The worst moments were with my old friends. They had known me as a strong man, a man who built his fortune with his own hands, a man who carried respect everywhere he went. But when she sat beside me, she stripped that image away. She would joke about how I needed help climbing stairs, how I forgot where I put my keys, how I could not keep up with her youth. They laughed politely, but I saw the pity in their eyes. Pity hurt worse than laughter. Even at family gatherings where blood should protect dignity, she mocked me. She whispered to relatives that I was like a child she had to care for, that I was too old to make decisions. Sometimes she spoke so loudly it was no longer a whisper. "He's lucky to have me," she said once, her hand on my arm, smiling sweetly to hide the cruelty. "Otherwise, he wouldn't survive." My relatives looked at me with sadness, but none of them spoke up. Their silence was another knife in my back. I sat quietly through it all, ashamed of how far I had fallen. The man who once commanded respect now bowed his head in humiliation. The man who once stood tall now shrank in the shadow of a woman young enough to be his granddaughter. I wanted to defend myself, but the fear of losing her kept my lips closed. I thought if I stayed silent, she might stop. But she didn't. My silence only gave her more power. The humiliation grew until I no longer recognized myself. I was no longer the respected man I had been. I was a spectacle, a joke, a cautionary tale whispered behind closed doors. And every time she mocked me, every time she laughed at my age, a piece of me broke inside. The house that once felt warm became colder with every passing day. At first, I thought marriage would bring companionship, that I would no longer eat meals alone or walk through empty rooms in silence. But soon, I realized I was lonelier with her than I had ever been by myself. She filled the rooms with noise, but not with love. She filled the closets with clothes, but not with care. She filled my days with demands, but not with kindness. At night, I lay in bed alone. Sometimes she didn't come home until late hours, and when she did, she smelled of perfume that wasn't hers, laughter clinging to her lips from places I had never been. When I asked where she had gone, she waved her hand dismissively and said I worried too much. Other nights, she stayed glued to her phone, smiling at messages I never saw, ignoring my attempts to talk. I reached out for conversation, for a small moment of warmth, but she gave me only silence. Meals became a reminder of my place in her world. She ordered takeout for herself and left me with leftovers. She sat scrolling through her phone while I ate quietly, invisible at the same table. Once, I asked her to sit with me, to share a meal like a real couple. She laughed and said, "I have better things to do than sit with an old man." Her words echoed in my head long after she left the room. I began to walk through the house like a ghost. I moved from chair to chair, from room to room, but there was no warmth, no welcome. She decorated the walls with expensive art and filled the rooms with shiny furniture, but it all felt empty. What use is gold when your heart is starving? What use is a house when you are a stranger inside it? I realized then that I was not a husband in her eyes. I was a wallet. I was a bank account. I was the man who paid for her dresses, her shoes, her trips. I was not the man she loved, not the man she respected, not the man she cared for. And the lonelier I felt, the clearer it became. I had not married love. I had married a performance, and the act was fading. Every night when I lay down, I thought of my late wife. She had been gentle, kind, and even in our hardest times, she had never made me feel small. With her, even silence had been warm. With this young woman, even laughter was cold. I realized I missed the sound of true love more than I missed anything else. And in that loneliness, a quiet pain grew, one that no riches could cure. The loneliness was heavy, but what came next was worse. Strange things began happening in the house, small details that should have been nothing, but to me they felt like cracks in a wall about to break. Late at night, the phone would ring. She would rush to answer it, whispering in another room where I could not hear. Sometimes she would step outside into the garden, her voice low, her laughter sharp, the words too soft to catch. When I asked who it was, she smiled coldly and said, "Just a friend." But her eyes shifted away, and I knew it was not the truth. Papers began to appear, folded and hidden in drawers. When I asked about them, she grew defensive, her voice rising like I had no right to ask. "Don't you trust me?" she snapped. I wanted to believe her, but her tone, her sudden anger, only fed my doubt. Once, I caught her hiding something quickly in her handbag when I walked into the room. When I asked, she laughed and kissed my forehead like I was a child. "You imagine things," she whispered. But my instincts told me otherwise. She started going out more often. Sometimes she said she was meeting friends. Other times she claimed it was shopping. But she always returned late, with new things in her hands that I had never seen before. Once, I noticed she wore a necklace I had not bought. I asked where it came from, and she said she used her own money. But I knew she had no money of her own. Every coin in her life came from me. Even the way she looked at me began to change. In the beginning, she had looked at me with sweetness, even if it was only an act. Now her eyes were filled with impatience, like every word I spoke was a waste of her time. Sometimes, when she thought I wasn't watching, I caught her rolling her eyes, texting quickly, her lips curled in a secret smile meant for someone else. The bed grew colder too. She turned her back on me at night, clutching her phone under the blanket. Once, I woke to see her typing in the glow of the screen, her face lit by a smile she no longer gave me. When she noticed I was awake, she quickly locked the screen and pretended to sleep. I lay there with my heart heavy, wondering who was on the other end of those messages. I told myself I was overthinking, that maybe she was young and simply wanted her own space. But deep down, I knew. The hints were too many, too strong, too sharp to ignore. She was hiding something. Something bigger than money, bigger than loneliness, bigger than disrespect. And though I tried to push it away, the truth was whispering to me louder with every passing day. The woman I thought loved me was keeping a secret that would break me completely. The truth did not come to me in a storm. It came quietly, in the middle of a simple afternoon. She had gone out in a hurry, leaving her handbag on the table and a drawer half open in the bedroom. For months, I had felt the weight of suspicion pressing on my chest, but I had held myself back, afraid of what I might find. That day, my hands trembled as I pulled the drawer open. Inside were papers, folded neatly but not hidden well enough. My heart pounded as I opened them one by one. At first, they looked like normal documents, receipts, letters, forms. But then I saw names that were not mine. A marriage certificate with her name, dated years before I ever met her. And next to it, no divorce papers, no proof of separation, nothing to show it had ever ended. My breath caught in my throat. My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped the paper. She had been married before, and she was still married. I sat there in silence, the truth burning into me like fire. She was never truly my wife. The marriage I had believed in, the vows I had spoken with trembling joy, the future I thought we shared. It was all a lie. She had stood beside me in a white dress, holding my hand, while another man still carried her name. The shock was so heavy I could not even cry. I searched further and found more. Hidden letters addressed to her by someone who wrote with love, someone far younger than me. There were receipts for hotels, gifts, and things I never bought her. There were photos of her with him, smiling in ways she never smiled at me. Every detail was another knife, cutting me deeper and deeper until I could hardly breathe. I realized then that everything I had felt, the late-night phone calls, the hidden papers, the cold bed, the laughter in the dark, all of it was true. She had never loved me. She had only used me. She had played the role of a wife while living another life in secret. And the cruelest truth of all, she had never even been mine to begin with. I sat in that chair for hours, the papers spread across my lap, my eyes staring into nothing. I thought of my neighbors who whispered, my friends who warned me, my family who shook their heads. They had all seen what I refused to see. I had defended her when they doubted, and now their doubts stood before me in black ink and undeniable proof. The discovery broke something inside me. Not just my trust, not just my pride, but the very foundation of my hope. I was 72, and I had believed I found love again, but all I had found was betrayal dressed as affection. When the truth finally sank in, it felt like the walls of my home collapsed around me. I looked at those papers again and again, hoping I had misread them, hoping there was some mistake. But the ink did not lie. The marriage certificate carried her name. The absence of divorce papers screamed louder than any words. She was still bound to another man, and that meant what we had was not a marriage. It was a lie. Every day I had lived with her, every smile she had given me, every time she had touched my hand. It was all a performance. A cruel act written not for love, but for money. The betrayal was deeper than anything I had ever felt in my life. I had worked my whole life, building my fortune brick by brick, sacrifice by sacrifice. I had believed this young woman loved me for who I was inside, not for the numbers in my bank. But the truth was harsher than I could bear. She had seen me not as a husband, but as an opportunity. To her, I was never a man. I was a wallet, a step toward luxury, a bridge she walked across to fund a life with someone else. I thought back to the moments I had once cherished. The day she said yes to me, the day she moved into my home, the nights I believed she chose me over the entire world. Now those moments turned to poison. I realized she had rehearsed every word, every gesture. When she told me she loved me, she must have laughed inside. When she held my hand, she must have thought of him. When she slept in my bed, her heart must have been elsewhere. I had been blind, so desperate to believe in love again that I ignored every sign. The cruelest cut of all was knowing she had never been mine to begin with. While I stood beside her at the altar, believing I was beginning a new chapter, she was already writing a script of lies. She wore a white dress, but her promises were stained with deception. She carried my name on her lips, but carried his name on paper. To her, I was nothing more than a role to play, a source of wealth to drain, a man too old and too lonely to see the truth. I sat in the silence of that house, the air heavy with shame. I thought of how she mocked my age in front of friends, how she rolled her eyes at me in public, how she laughed at my slowness, and I realized it was never just disrespect. It was contempt. She did not love me. She did not even tolerate me. She despised me for being the fool who gave her everything without asking questions. That day, my heart did not just break. It hardened. I knew then that my life with her was finished. The betrayal had ended any love, any trust, any hope I had left. She had used me. and she thought she could keep using me. But she did not know yet that the man she saw as weak, the man she mocked as old, still carried power in silence. She thought she had destroyed me, but in truth, she had freed me from the chains of her lies. Once the shock settled and the pain turned into anger, I knew I could not stay silent. She had humiliated me in public, mocked me in front of friends, and robbed me of my dignity. If I allowed her secret to remain hidden, then she would keep winning. She would keep draining me until there was nothing left. But I still had one thing she underestimated: proof. The papers I found, the receipts, the letters, the photos, the marriage certificate that still tied her to another man. All of it was evidence strong enough to burn the entire mask she wore. I gathered everything carefully. I placed the documents in a folder, making sure each one was in order, every receipt for the expensive things she bought, every hidden letter signed with another man's name, every hotel booking that showed her lies, and most of all, the marriage certificate without a divorce. These were not just papers, they were weapons. They were the truth that would tear down the false story she had built around us. The next morning, I walked into my lawyer's office. His face turned serious as I laid the folder on his desk. He flipped through the pages slowly, his eyes narrowing as he read. When he looked up, there was no pity in his face, only fire. "She committed fraud," he said. "She committed bigamy. She has no legal claim to you, to your money, or to your estate." His words felt like air filling my lungs after months of drowning. For the first time, I was not powerless. I had the truth on my side and the law to back me. Together, we prepared the case. He contacted the authorities, filed complaints, and made sure the evidence was secured. He told me that once this came to light, not only would she lose her claim, but she could face charges. I nodded silently, my hands trembling, but this time not from weakness. They trembled from strength, from the decision to finally end this nightmare. When she returned home that evening, she found me calm. Too calm. She walked in with shopping bags, her face glowing with pride at the money she had spent. She looked at me with the same dismissive smile, as if I were just a shadow in her life. She did not know yet that the shadow had found its voice. She did not know that the truth was already moving against her. For days, I said nothing, letting her live in her illusion. But inside me, the fire grew stronger. I thought of all the nights I sat in silence while she laughed at messages from another man. I thought of all the dinners where she mocked me, all the times she treated me like a burden. Soon, the world would know who she truly was. She had stripped me of my dignity, but I would strip her of her mask. The exposure would not be private, it would not be whispered. It would be public, undeniable, written in law and judgment. She had tried to destroy me in front of others, but now it was her turn to face the shame. And this time, I would not bow my head. I would stand tall, not as the fool who married her, but as the man who exposed her. The day came when her secret could no longer hide in shadows. In court, she stood tall at first, dressed in her finest clothes, her chin raised high as if she could charm her way out of anything. But then the evidence was placed on the table. Page after page, document after document, her lies were exposed in front of strangers, lawyers, and judges. The marriage certificate she had hidden, the absence of divorce papers, the receipts for hotel rooms, the letters signed with another man's name. Each piece of proof cut away at the story she had built. I sat there in silence, my hands folded, my heart steady. For months she had made me bow my head, but now it was her turn. She avoided my eyes as the judge read out the charges. Bigamy, fraud, financial abuse. Words that once belonged to criminals now belonged to her. Her face turned pale, her smile faded, and the arrogance that once filled her voice was gone. She tried to speak, tried to twist the story, but the papers spoke louder than she ever could. The truth was undeniable. The courtroom murmured with shock. People who had once whispered about me, the old fool who married a young woman, were now whispering about her. Their eyes no longer looked at me with pity. They looked at her with disgust. She had mocked me in public, but now her humiliation was public. She had called me old, useless, too slow, but now she was the one stripped of respect. Her lawyer tried to argue, tried to claim she was misunderstood, but even he looked tired, defeated by the mountain of evidence. The judge dismissed her claims, ruling in my favor. She had no right to my fortune, no right to my estate, no right even to call herself my wife. Everything she thought she controlled slipped through her fingers in a single day. Outside the court, reporters spoke about the case. Neighbors whispered to each other. Friends who had once shaken their heads at me now shook their heads at her. She had planned to take everything from me, but instead, she lost everything herself. Her reputation was shattered, her lies exposed, her greed revealed. She had walked into my life like a queen, but she walked out of that courtroom like a criminal. As for me, I walked out slowly, but with my head high. I was no longer the man mocked at dinners, no longer the man whispered about behind closed doors. I was the man who had endured betrayal, but found the strength to fight back. The fallout had turned the story upside down. She thought she had destroyed me, but in the end, she destroyed herself. When the court doors closed behind me, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. For months I had walked in shame, mocked as an old fool who had fallen for a young woman's charm. But now, I walked out not as a fool, but as a man who uncovered the truth. My name was cleared, my dignity restored, and her lies exposed for all to see. For the first time in years, I felt proud of myself again. Not for my wealth, not for my age, but for my courage to stand against betrayal. I did not cheer at her downfall. I did not dance in her humiliation. I simply stood steady, because justice is not about joy. Justice is about balance. She had stolen my peace, and now I had taken it back. She had tried to erase my dignity, and now hers was gone instead. She thought I was weak, but in the end, my silence, my patience, and my proof had been stronger than all her tricks. Life after the case became calmer. People who once whispered about me now came to me with respect. They said I had been brave, that I had shown strength. But I knew it was not bravery. It was survival. It was the only choice left to a man who had been pushed to the edge of humiliation. I did what I had to do, not just to save my fortune, but to save my name, my soul, my final years of dignity. I moved away from the house we once shared. Every wall, every corner reminded me of the lies she had told. I wanted peace, and so I found a smaller place, quiet and warm, where I could breathe without memories choking me. In that home, I was alone again, but I was not lonely. Loneliness with dignity is better than company with cruelty. I filled my days with small joys, reading, walking, speaking to neighbors who truly cared. I lived simply, but I lived freely. Her name faded quickly. People stopped talking about her with curiosity and began talking about her with disgust. She vanished from the town, ashamed, disgraced, carrying the weight of her secret. I did not chase her. I did not think of revenge anymore. The truth had already done enough. She destroyed herself with the very secret she thought would never be found. And me? I looked at myself in the mirror one morning and smiled. Not because I had won, but because I had survived. I was 72, yes, but I was not finished. I was still a man who could stand, a man who could fight, a man who could claim justice. She had used me for money, but she forgot that money was never my greatest strength. My strength was in truth, in patience, in the will to stand up even when humiliated. Final thought, she used me for my money, but her own secret destroyed her, not me.